Desperate to get your hands on a PlayStation 3, you ventured into a Walmart parking lot at 2 a.m., only to find yourself face to face with a plainclothes cop and a nightmarish twist of corruption. So way back when the PS3 first came out, you really wanted one. I mean, you wanted one bad. The main reason was because you wanted to play Call of Duty 3, which is still your favorite game series ever. But since you missed out on pre-ordering one, you were out of luck when the actual release date came. You remember watching eBay like a hawk, scouring Craigslist every day, and day after day went by with no luck at all. But then, boom. You see this one post on Craigslist that says a guy is selling his brand new PlayStation 3, Call of Duty 3 included, and he's selling both of them for like $400, at least 100 below asking price. The only thing was, he needed to sell it as soon as possible, and he needed someone to drive over to him to pick it up. The person who could pay his asking price and pick up promptly got the package. Somehow you got fortunate, incredibly so. A lot of folks were messaging him for it, and some sounded like they were going to rob him. You were older than most of the wannabe buyers, so you texted him a picture of the cash and arranged to meet in a Walmart parking lot that night to pick it up. You felt like a kid at Christmas. Granted, most kids don't drive to Santa to pay him $400 to get their presents, but still, you were majorly excited to pick it up. The trouble was, the guy was working late that night, so you'd have to drive over to the Walmart parking lot at like 2 in the morning to pick it up. I know what you're thinking, Walmart parking lot at 2 a.m. Something bad was always going to happen. And yeah, you'd be lying if you said it hadn't crossed your mind when you were thinking about the whole thing. But you wanted that stupid World War II game so badly that it outweighed whatever good sense you had. So that's how you ended up in the Walmart parking lot in South Hanover way after dark. Like you said, there was always a chance something bad was going to happen. You just figured it'd be from the other end of the law. You were just sitting there waiting when you heard someone tapping on the glass of your driver's side window, and you saw the gun. You thought you were getting carjacked or something. They got you out of the car at gunpoint, but then when you saw the badge on the dude in plain clothes, you honestly breathed a sigh of relief at first. You knew your reason for being there sounded sketchy. Picking up a PlayStation 3 at 2 in the morning would have sounded really suspicious if you were a cop. But then when they pulled the $400 in cash out of your wallet and said they were confiscating it as suspected earnings from drugs, you started to get really angry. You told them to search your car for drugs or guns or whatever they were looking for. If they didn't find anything, they had no right to take your money. One of the cops smirked when you said that though, screaming up in your face and threatening to smack you. His partner had to calm him down, like he was legitimately worried that he was about to punch you. The angry cop walked back to their unmarked car, and the other cop wrote up a ticket for the cash they took. While he did that, he apologized for his partner and promised if you brought some pay stubs to the precinct, you'd get all your money back. No problems, you were angry. You were probably going to miss out on the PlayStation, but you figured the guys were just doing their jobs and getting it taken by them was much better than getting straight up robbed and carjacked by dudes that wouldn't have been so reluctant to beat you down. Because you figured you could still get your hands on the PlayStation, you drove over to the precinct first thing in the morning with some pay stubs, which you figured would prove the money was yours. You got there, handed in your ticket, and some cop walked out with an evidence bag with your money in it. Only you were shocked when she put it down in front of you. You told her there must be some kind of mistake. You told her the cops pulled you out of your car and took exactly $400 off of you, but in the bag there was no more than $100. She then showed you the ticket, and in the little box that listed confiscated items it said 100 instead of 400. Right then it was your turn to freak out. You couldn't believe they did you like that. You started demanding complaint forms, numbers to call, all of that. The lady just thought you were lying about the amount, but you swore you had more money than that. She gave you the number to call to register a complaint, which you did. I know. Cops taking bribes around Baltimore is probably only raising eyebrows with the most naive of you. But missing out on the PS3 wasn't the scary thing. The scary thing was coming home from work 3 days later and seeing a car you didn't recognize parked across the street. You didn't immediately assume anything bad, you just wondered who in the neighborhood got themselves a new set of wheels. That's when you saw him. The same plainclothes cop that wanted to tee off on you that night. The same cop who took your money. He just looked at you dead in the eyes and smiled before driving off down the block. It was just like a warning or something, just to tell you he knew you made the complaint. If criminals or gangsters do stuff that shakes you up, sure, but it makes sense. Those guys are supposed to rob you or shoot you or whatever. But when it's the cops doing it, the same people who are supposed to protect you, who are you supposed to protect you? Who are you supposed to turn to? A Craigslist deal for used furniture led you to a house full of old memories and a confrontation with the very man who almost destroyed your family decades earlier. Back when I was about 4 or 5 years old, my mom and I went to stay with my grandparents for the weekend. My dad left before I was born, so it was always just me and my mom. My grandparents were a huge part of my life growing up. We would go over on Friday night and stay until late on Sunday. This was mainly so my mom could have a social life or work weekend shifts at her job. One dark Sunday evening around the holidays, I remember being carried out to the car, half asleep already. I must have fallen asleep the moment I was strapped into the car seat because I don't even remember driving off. The next thing I remember, I felt the cold on my face and heard my mom crying and begging someone not to hurt her because I was in the car. I looked outside and saw what I thought was a monster at the time, but I later learned it was a man in a bunny mask. It was like the masks in the slasher movie You're Next, not some flimsy plastic thing. It was super detailed and really creepy looking. The guy and his partner had basically staged a car accident to get my mom to pull over. When she did, the man in the bunny mask attacked us. They robbed us, did something unspeakable to my mom, and almost killed her. She spent almost 2 weeks in the hospital. I lived with my grandparents for almost a whole year because my mom was in and out of various institutions. The whole thing messed her up so bad. I didn't get away scot-free either. I had nightmares about a bunny monster chasing my mom for years. But time is the greatest healer, and as I got older, things eventually got better. We started to live a somewhat normal life again. Fast forward to when I was 24. I was still living with my mom but looking for an apartment because I got a decent paying job with my college degree. The place I found came unfurnished, so I was looking for cheap furniture and decor. One of the first places I checked was Craigslist. In the for sale section, I saw some pretty sweet items at bargain prices. I contacted one of the sellers and discovered it was a guy's granddaughter selling off his stuff to pay for a care home. The girl seemed really nice, and she even promised me a discount if I bought a bunch of stuff in bulk, which suited me because I needed a lot quickly. We arranged for me to go over to her grandpa's place to check out the stuff before I handed over the cash. On a Saturday afternoon, I drove over to the house to start haggling. She introduced herself and was really sweet, but when I saw her grandpa, I realized why they needed the money for a care home. He was in a really bad way. He was in a wheelchair, had an oxygen tank, and barely reacted to his granddaughter introducing me. He looked like he didn't have too many years left. I checked out the main items on my list: a closet, a desk, and a dinner table. We agreed on a price. I needed to arrange a U-Haul to pick them up, but that could be done the following weekend. After we confirmed the purchases, the granddaughter and I had some coffee. She explained that almost everything in the house was for sale. Apparently, her grandpa had been a wild child in his youth and had been in and out of jail. He didn't have a lot saved up for a rainy day. She also mentioned that everything in the garage was for sale too, and I was welcome to check it out. I figured I'd buy a few more things from them, maybe stuff they couldn't sell easily, to help decorate my apartment and support a worthy cause. After finishing the coffee, she went to help her grandpa with something, and I headed to the garage. The garage was piled high with stuff. There were old cookie jars, books, weird little ornaments, and all kinds of things. I started digging through the pile, placing items I considered buying to one side. Then I spotted something that froze me in place. It was a bunny mask, dirty and old, but I recognized it immediately. It was the same design as the one worn by the guy who attacked my mom. I stared at it for a few seconds, then stumbled back in disbelief. I told myself there was no way it was the exact same one. It looked like a mass-produced Easter bunny mask, but then I started piecing it together. Her grandpa had been in and out of prison. It made a horrible kind of sense. I tried to pull myself together, bundled up the stuff I pulled out from the trash pile, and carried it into the house. I put on a fake smile, paid for the stuff, and asked the girl what her grandpa had gone to jail for. She was taken aback and didn't know exactly. She just knew he didn't talk about it, and neither did her mom. I insisted on thanking him personally, even though the girl said he might not respond. She let me go into his room, probably thinking I was sweet but strange. As I walked in, there he was, staring into space. I sat down near him, arranging my thoughts. I asked him where he was living around December of 1987. He didn't react. I was about to leave, thinking I might confuse or upset him, but I couldn't leave without asking more questions. I asked if he had robbed a woman with a kid in the car around Christmas that year. His eyes shifted as if he was remembering. I told him I thought I knew what one of his sentences was for. His jaw began to tremble, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. I told him I knew it was him. His reaction confirmed it. Tears welled up in his eyes. I didn't care what he wanted to say at that point. I just said, "You almost ruined my life. You don't deserve to be in that chair." He whimpered as I stood up and walked out. The girl thanked me as I left, and I disguised my emotions by telling her we had an emotional exchange of gratitude. I hope she never finds out the truth. I got back into my car and only made it about 2 blocks before I pulled over and started bawling. I was filled with doubt, wondering if I had just distressed a sick old man. But another part of me kept saying, that was him. I know it was him. I drove to my mom's place and told her about it. We both cried when she said she also thought it was the same guy. She said someone was caught for what happened and was sent to jail. She had to appear in court to testify, which weighed heavily on her mental health. I had no idea anyone was caught. I always thought no one had been arrested. When I described what the guy looked like, it clicked for her. It seemed like perfect karma for the guy, like a fitting end to his story. In the months that followed, it felt like a great weight had been lifted from our shoulders. Nothing could ever change the past, but knowing the guy was suffering felt like proof there was a God. I know it might sound a little unhinged, but I can't think of another way to phrase it. I still don't quite believe in happy endings, and I still think the world is a cold, cruel place. But I know from experience that there is such a thing as divine justice. When a beloved radio host failed to show up for work, police discovered a grisly scene and unraveled a dark web of betrayal involving a teenager and a fatal, twisted encounter. You were born in Philadelphia on March 23, 1961, and you fell in love with talk radio from a very young age. You dreamed of working in the industry, and for many years you lived that dream by working at the WABC 77 morning show. You read out periodic news updates throughout the morning and joined in conversations with the hosts about those news stories. Those who tuned in became very familiar with the sound of your voice. In April 2008, you moved from WABC to the ABC radio network. Over the next 11 months, you focused on local interest stories that you personally investigated. To your coworkers, you seemed to live a quiet and unassuming life. But after you failed to show up for work on March 21st, 2009, it was discovered that your private life was very different from your public persona. On that Saturday morning, when you failed to show up for work, your coworkers became concerned. On the few days that you took off due to sickness, you always called ahead. By mid-afternoon, when you still had not contacted them, your coworkers called 911 and asked the police to check on you. On Sunday, March 22nd, 2 patrol officers arrived at your apartment around 8:30 in the morning. At first, they noticed nothing out of the ordinary, but on closer inspection, they detected the sound of running water from somewhere in the apartment. That alone wouldn't normally be any cause for alarm, but coupled with the fact that you failed to answer the door when the officers announced themselves, it made for a very ominous situation. Around 15 to 20 minutes after they first arrived on the scene, the patrol officers forced their way into your apartment. Once they did, they discovered a truly horrifying sight. You were lying naked on your bedroom floor in a pool of your own blood. Your arms and legs were bound tight with rope, and your bloody corpse had been mutilated by around 50 stab wounds to your neck, chest, and arms. The sound of running water was coming from the bathroom, and the blood around the taps and sinks suggested that your killer had attempted to clean themselves off before escaping during the night. During the examination of the crime scene, the attending officers found no signs of forced entry, leading them to believe that you had known and trusted your attacker enough to welcome them into your home. With this in mind, homicide detectives began scouring your computer and phone in the hopes of finding any evidence of grudges or arguments between you and your friends or neighbors. This is how they discovered a message exchange between you and a 16-year-old high school student named John Curtis. The text message threads and call logs taken from your phone suggested that you and Curtis had arranged to meet on the night of Friday, March 20th, and that the purpose of the meeting had been less than wholesome. You had met after you posted on Craigslist that you were seeking a night of passion with a younger man. The timing of your exchanges suggested that Curtis had been one of the last people to see you alive. But after trying to bring him in for questioning, the police discovered that the boy was less than willing to give himself up. Not only that, but a deep dive into Curtis's background brought up some very disturbing information. According to his social media profiles, John Curtis was a self-declared Satanist with a penchant for extreme sadism. When the police reached out to his family, they confirmed that John was a deeply troubled young man. His father was appalled by the allegations and agreed to take part in a sting that would bring his son to justice. The father contacted Curtis and convinced him to return to his East Elmhurst home to collect $300. When Curtis returned to collect the money, he was promptly arrested. At his trial, Curtis was charged as an adult, and although he pled not guilty to a charge of second-degree murder, he was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life. In the aftermath of his imprisonment, some true crime aficionados cited the Curtis case as an example of a lethal hate crime on homosexual men, where the perpetrator exhibited some degree of homosexuality themselves. To them, it was a crime of projected self-hatred. But to others, your murder was something considerably more disturbing. Some argued that Curtis had targeted a desperate older man simply to secure access to his home. Under the guise of a bedroom game, Curtis was able to bind his prospective victim before sacrificing him in the name of Satan. Others argued that rather than the murder being satanic, Curtis killed you when it became clear that you were a child abuser, and that Curtis's involvement with you was merely a sting to seek out and punish someone willing to sleep with an underage boy. It's almost impossible to establish any of these theories as fact. All that Curtis's lawyer argued in court was the idea that you and his client had been involved in a long-term but violently unstable relationship. Whether or not this is true, the judge and jury took no mercy on the 16-year-old who was condemned to spend the rest of his youth in a federal correctional facility. Maybe one day John Curtis will properly explain why he killed you, but it's just as likely that your family will forever be in the dark as to why their loved one had to die. I just finished my studies and needed a small place to live while I looked for a job. I was working part-time at a little grocery store, but now that I was done with school, it was time to find something better. Renting an apartment by myself was too expensive, so I was on the lookout for a room to rent in someone's house. I knew it would be a bit uncomfortable at first living with strangers, but I didn't really have another option. My friend from school who used to share a room with me told me to try Craigslist. It seemed that other websites didn't list single rooms or were too complicated to use. Craigslist had a lot of choices, so I decided to stick with it. After several days, I was getting nowhere. Nobody answered my messages, and the few who did just said the room was already taken. Then, on a Saturday morning, I saw a new listing. It was close, affordable, and looked decent. A man named John was offering a large house with an available bedroom which also had its own bathroom and closet. It seemed perfect. So I sent him an email to show my interest and then went off to my job. Since the ad was fresh that morning, I was hopeful I was the first to reach out. During my lunch break, I checked my emails and saw that John had replied. He wanted me to come and see the place that same afternoon. I knew I'd be tired after work, but I really wanted this room, so I agreed, and we set a time. After my shift, I drove there, taking only about 10 minutes. The house looked good from the outside, just a normal house in a regular neighborhood. I parked my car nearby and walked up to the door to knock softly. After waiting a little, I knocked again, a bit louder. Just as I was about to text John, he opened the door to let me in. He was covered in sweat, as though he'd just been exercising, and he didn't smell nice at all. I didn't want to seem rude, so I didn't mention it. He started showing me around the first floor, pointing out the kitchen and living room. He said he hardly used these rooms, so I wouldn't be in his way, but looking around, it seemed like he used them a lot. The kitchen sink was overflowing with dirty dishes, and the couch was stained all over. The house was a lot messier than I expected, especially since the photos made it look so clean. One thing that really stood out to me was the couch in the living room. The picture showed a brown leather couch, but the one I saw was black. I guess John might have used old photos of the house from before. This felt a bit dishonest, but I was mainly interested in my room, which was upstairs. John led me to the stairs and then stopped, gesturing for me to go up first. I felt really uneasy as I climbed the stairs, especially since John stayed at the bottom just smiling and telling me my room was the first one on the left. When I reached the top and was about to go to my room, I heard a soft noise from behind the door. I looked back at John, and his smile was gone. "Is there someone else living here?" I asked. He sounded annoyed and said it was just a friend staying over and I shouldn't worry. He told me to go look at the room, insisting I would like it. By then, I was scared. Why didn't you mention his friend earlier, I thought. It felt like something I should have known. I wanted to leave immediately. I tried to sound confident as I told John the place wasn't right for me and started back down the stairs. He didn't seem happy and blocked the bottom of the stairs. I stopped a few steps away, insisting I had to leave. He tried once more to get me to see the room, but I refused. After a moment, he surprisingly stepped aside with a smile, letting me pass. I rushed out the door. Something was off about that house. I felt fortunate to get out so easily. I'd feared I might need to push my way out. Later, I checked Craigslist, and the ad was gone. I often think about what was in that room. Maybe it was empty, but I feel it was something far worse. When I was in college, I used to go camping with friends during the summer. One year, we decided to explore a new area we hadn't visited before. It was a dense forest, quite far from the city. We were excited about the adventure and prepared all our gear, including tents, food, and a map of the area. After driving for several hours, we arrived and found a good spot to set up our camp. There were 5 of us: Mike, Sarah, Alex, John, and me. The first day went smoothly. We hiked a few trails, swam in a nearby lake, and enjoyed a campfire at night. However, things started getting strange on the second night. As we were sitting around the campfire, we heard rustling in the bushes. We assumed it was just a small animal and didn't pay much attention. But then, the noises got louder, and it felt like something or someone was watching us. Mike, being the bravest among us, grabbed a flashlight and walked towards the noise. We followed him, feeling a bit nervous. We didn't see anything unusual at first, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Eventually, we shrugged it off and went back to the campfire. Later that night, as we were getting ready to sleep, Sarah screamed. We all rushed to her tent, where she pointed out that her backpack was missing. We searched the entire campsite but couldn't find it. We thought maybe an animal had dragged it away. We tried to sleep, but the feeling of unease kept us awake. The next morning, we decided to pack up and leave a day early. We were all a bit spooked and didn't want to stay another night. As we were packing, we found Sarah's backpack hanging from a tree branch. about 20 feet off the ground. It was impossible for any of us to have put it there. We quickly packed the rest of our gear and left. To this day, none of us can explain what happened that night in the forest. We never went back to that area again. When I was a kid, my family moved into an old house in a small town. It was a beautiful large house with a lot of character, but it was also quite old. My parents were excited about the house, and my siblings and I quickly found our favorite spots. The house had a big backyard, perfect for playing, and a cozy attic filled with all sorts of interesting old things. One evening, about a month after we moved in, I was in my room playing with my toys when I heard a strange noise coming from the attic. It sounded like someone was walking around up there. I called out to my parents, but they were downstairs and didn't hear me. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to check it out myself. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the creaky stairs to the attic. When I reached the top, I shone the flashlight around, but didn't see anything unusual. Just as I was about to go back down, I heard the noise again, this time closer. I turned around quickly and saw a shadow move across the wall. My heart started racing, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the noise continued. It sounded like soft footsteps coming towards me. I gathered all my courage and called out, "Who's there?" There was no answer, but the footsteps stopped. I slowly backed away towards the stairs, keeping the flashlight pointed ahead. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze pass by me, and the flashlight flickered. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could and didn't stop until I reached my parents. I told them what had happened, but they assured me it was probably just the old house settling or the wind. I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the attic. After that night, I avoided the attic as much as possible. Whenever I had to go up there, I made sure it was during the day and that someone else was with me. Even now, years later, I still get a little uneasy thinking about that old house and the strange noises in the attic. One summer, my friends and I decided to take a road trip across the country. We planned to visit various landmarks and camp out at different spots along the way. We were excited about the adventure and spent weeks preparing for the trip. We packed all the essentials, made a detailed itinerary, and set off early one morning. Our journey was going well, and we had a lot of fun visiting different places. One night, we found a secluded camping spot near a forest. It was perfect quiet, beautiful, and far from any busy roads. We set up our tents, built a campfire, and enjoyed a relaxing evening under the stars. As it got late, we decided to get some sleep. We were exhausted from the day's activities and fell asleep quickly. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange noise. It sounded like whispering, but I couldn't make out any words. I thought maybe one of my friends was talking in their sleep, so I tried to go back to sleep. But the whispering continued and seemed to be getting closer. I sat up and looked around the tent, but I couldn't see anything. I unzipped the tent slightly and peered outside. The campfire had died down and everything was dark. Suddenly, I heard the whispering right next to my ear. I jumped and looked around, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding, and I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I quickly woke up my friends and told them what happened. They looked around but didn't find anything unusual. We decided to stay awake for the rest of the night, taking turns keeping watch. When morning came, we packed up and left the campsite as quickly as we could. We were all on edge and didn't want to stay another night there. As we drove away, we tried to rationalize what had happened, but none of us could come up with a good explanation. The experience left us shaken, and we made sure to choose more populated campsites for the rest of our trip. When I was younger, my friends and I loved exploring abandoned places. We would often go on adventures to find old, deserted buildings and see what we could discover. One day we heard about an old, abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. It had been closed for years, and there were rumors that it was haunted. Naturally, we decided we had to check it out. We planned to go there on a Saturday night. We gathered our flashlights, cameras, and some snacks and set off around sunset. It was a bit of a drive to get there, but we were all excited. When we finally arrived, the hospital looked even creepier than we had imagined. The building was large and looming, with broken windows and overgrown weeds all around it. We made our way inside through a side door that was slightly ajar. The interior was dark and musty, with peeling paint and scattered debris. We stuck together as we explored, moving slowly and quietly through the hallways. Every now and then we would hear strange noises, but we tried to brush them off as the wind or animals. After about an hour of exploring, we found a set of stairs leading down to the basement. It was dark and the air felt colder as we descended. When we reached the bottom, we saw a long hallway with several doors on either side. We decided to split up and check the rooms, agreeing to meet back in the hallway in 10 minutes. I took the first room on the left. It was small and empty, with just an old bed frame and some scattered papers. As I was looking around, I heard a soft humming sound. It was faint at first, but it gradually grew louder. I stepped out into the hallway, and the humming stopped. I called out to my friends, but there was no response. I started to feel uneasy. Suddenly, one of the doors at the end of the hallway slammed shut. I jumped and ran towards it, thinking maybe one of my friends was playing a prank. But when I reached the door and opened it, the room was empty. The humming started again, this time louder and more intense. I felt a cold breeze and a sense of dread washed over me. I ran back to the hallway, shouting for my friends. They came rushing out of their rooms, all looking just as scared as I felt. We decided it was time to leave. As we hurried up the stairs and back through the hospital, we kept hearing the humming and strange noises behind us. We didn't stop until we were back outside, breathing heavily and feeling a mix of fear and relief. We never went back to that hospital. The experience left us all shaken, and we decided to stick to exploring less creepy places from then on. To this day, we still talk about that night and wonder what was making those noises in the basement. As an actor struggling for steady work, I never expected a simple dishwasher repair job to turn into a fight for my life. My name is Mark, and I'm an actor. You probably haven't seen anything I've been in, despite all the auditions I've attended. Steady work has been scarce for me. My wife, Gretchen, works at a bank, and I take on part-time jobs at a coffee shop to contribute financially when I'm not pursuing acting. I also help around the house to ease Gretchen's burden as the main breadwinner. One day, Gretchen suggested I take on side gigs to supplement our income. Unsure of where to start, she advised me to check online for nearby opportunities. Skilled in construction and renovation, I searched Craigslist and quickly found a post from a man named Jonathan. He lived close by and needed help fixing his dishwasher door. Confident I could handle the task, I emailed him. After exchanging a few messages, I agreed to go to his place that afternoon. Jonathan seemed nice when I arrived. He led me to his kitchen, which was far nicer than ours, indicating he was well off. The only thing out of place was his old, broken dishwasher door. As I inspected the damage, Jonathan poured me a glass of lemonade. When I asked what caused the damage, he casually said it was old. However, I could tell he was lying. The door had scratches and yanked out screws, suggesting deliberate damage. Suspicious? I decided not to drink the lemonade. Pretending to take a sip, I kept my lips shut. I then asked Jonathan for a towel, and while he fetched it, I discreetly poured the lemonade down the sink. When he returned, I acted as though I had finished the drink. He smiled and told me to take my time before leaving the room. Although fearful, I wasn't certain Jonathan had tried to poison me. With him out of sight, I quickly fixed the dishwasher door, which took about 10 minutes. Just as I was about to leave, Jonathan appeared behind me, commenting that I looked woozy. His expectation of my reaction confirmed my suspicions. To ensure my safe exit, I pretended to feel dizzy and stumbled slightly. Jonathan suggested I sit while he got my payment and guided me toward the living room, where I noticed a rope on the table. Sensing his plan to tie me up, I insisted on immediate payment via Venmo, saying I needed to get home. Ignoring his protests, I hurried to the door and opened it, only to find Gretchen standing there. Without a word, she entered, forcing me to step back. Confused, I asked what was happening. She placed a hand on my chest before shoving me onto the couch. Turning to Jonathan, she inquired if I had drunk everything. He confirmed, amazed I was still standing. They both looked at me, and Jonathan explained that Gretchen needed a real man in her life, implying their plan to get rid of me. Gretchen pulled a knife from her purse, advancing towards me. Jonathan grabbed my arm, attempting to tie me up, but I kicked him hard, causing him to stumble into Gretchen. She accidentally stabbed him, and as Jonathan screamed in pain, I fled the house. I drove to a busy street and called the police, who instructed me to come to the station and give a statement. They warned me not to return to Jonathan's house. Within an hour, the police found evidence supporting my story at Jonathan's house, including traces of sleeping medicine in the glass and the bloody knife. However, they couldn't locate Jonathan or Gretchen. It's been 3 weeks, and I'm still waiting for the police to find them. They're still on the run. Moving to a new town for a teaching job seemed like a fresh start, until a Craigslist rental offer led me to witness something horrific. My name is Evan. Last year I got a new teaching job in Asheville, North Carolina. I had never been there before, but the job was perfect, and I couldn't say no. I instantly accepted the offer. I had to find an apartment within my price range, but I was shocked at how expensive Asheville was. The rent was more than double what I could afford. I looked all over but couldn't find anything reasonable. While I was staying in a pretty gross hotel in Nashville, someone suggested I look for places on Craigslist. I had never used Craigslist before and always thought it was a bit sketchy, but I was desperate. So I went to the rental listings and found a guy named Andy who wanted to rent out a room in his condo. I didn't like the idea of sharing a bathroom and kitchen with someone I had never met, but the address was literally down the street from my new job. I emailed him to tell him I was interested. We exchanged some messages and eventually agreed to a Zoom meeting so we could see if we were compatible. When I saw his face on my computer screen, I was instantly relieved. He seemed like such a nice, honest guy. He answered all my questions and gave me a really good first impression. During our meeting, he was sitting at his table with the kitchen counter just behind him. I couldn't see a lot of the house, but what I did see looked nice. I asked if he could move his laptop around and give me a virtual tour of the place, but he said he wanted to clean up a little first. He told me this meeting was just to figure out if we were personally compatible. That should have been a red flag for me, but I trusted him. I was about to end the call when I noticed something moving on the floor behind him. It was a little black lump. I leaned closer to my computer to get a better look, and he noticed my expression because he spun around in his chair. Instantly, he jumped up and ran into the kitchen. By then, I could see more of the black lump. It looked like someone's head covered in a garbage bag. It was some poor guy wrapped in a bag, and he wasn't dead. I couldn't see most of him because the kitchen counter was in the way, but I could still see him writhing on the floor. Andy ran toward him and kicked his head until the body was once again hidden behind the counter. He stood there for a second looking down. I think he was waiting for the body to stop moving. Then he casually walked back to his computer screen. I was so focused on what I had just seen that I completely forgot I was still on Zoom. He could still see me. He looked right into my eyes, his face weirdly blank. "So you saw that," he said. He sounded like I had just caught him jaywalking or something. I didn't move. "Yeah, I figured," he said. Then he ended the Zoom call. I don't know how long I sat there completely frozen, processing what had just happened. 1 second, I was having a friendly chat with this nice, normal guy. The next, I was watching a murder. It didn't feel real. Slowly, realization set in. I was in danger, I was a witness, and Andy would come for me. I couldn't imagine what he was capable of. I had to figure out if he could track me down. Thankfully, Craigslist uses temporary email accounts to protect its clients, so Andy didn't have my email. We had never exchanged phone numbers or shared our last names, so he didn't have those either. All he had was my Zoom address. Was that enough to find me? Maybe, but it would take him a while. Even if he had all my contact information, he didn't know my hotel room. I'd be safe for now. All I had to do was call the police and tell them everything. I reached for my phone and dialed 911. I told the dispatcher everything. It took a while because I wanted to include every detail while it was fresh in my brain. I knew they would record those calls for later. Then I told her I was driving straight to the station and hung up. I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. I think I was still in shock, at least a little bit. That seemed to help. Then I grabbed my keys and left. When I opened the hotel door, Andy was waiting on the other side. In the time it took me to talk to the police, he had driven across the street and found me. I felt so stupid for not going to the police station immediately. He shoved me backwards and walked inside before I could stop him. Running into my ex at the store was the last thing I wanted, but what followed was a terrifying reminder of why I left him in the first place. I told her no. Then her smile disappeared, and she asked, "Do you know that man?" I turned around to see who she was looking at. I saw my ex-boyfriend Ronnie standing behind a display of shirts. He wasn't moving, just staring at me. My blood ran cold. Ronnie was a terrible boyfriend. He screamed at me all the time and erupted with anger whenever he saw me talking to another man. Things got so bad between us that one night I just packed up and left without saying goodbye. Ronnie was the reason I left this town in the first place. I was worried that I'd see him again when I came back, but I didn't expect to see him staring at me across a huge store. "Would you like me to call security?" the woman asked. I told her not to worry. I knew he was probably just shocked to see me. We had broken up so long ago. He was probably just going to leave me alone. But he didn't. He started following me throughout the store. I went to the shoe section, then the electronics, then the books. Wherever I went, he kept pace. He made sure not to get too close because he didn't want the workers to get suspicious of him, but he wasn't even trying to hide. I was starting to get really scared. I made it to the exit and passed the same old woman. I ran outside and tried to get to my car. Ronnie kept coming. Now that we were in the parking lot, he broke out into a full sprint. He caught up to me within seconds and grabbed my shoulder. "Please, babe," he said. I didn't want to talk to him. I wanted to run, but I knew he would catch me. He pulled me around to face him and smiled that stupid grin he always used to make me feel safe. I was terrified. "Why did you leave me?" he asked. "I miss you so much." His voice was quiet and desperate. I could tell he wasn't going to let me go until I answered him. I didn't know what to say. I needed to find myself, I stammered. I wasn't happy. His smile grew wider. "You were happy." "I know you were." He tightened his grip on my shoulder. "You just forgot how much you love me." "I don't love you anymore," I said. "Please, let me go." His smile turned into a scowl. "Let you go," he repeated. "Let you go." He pushed me into the side of a nearby van. "I can't let you go," he said. "I need you." "No," I said, my voice shaking. "You don't need me." Ronnie leaned in closer. I could smell his breath. "You're coming with me," he whispered. "Whether you like it or not." I tried to push him away, but he was too strong. He grabbed my wrist and started pulling me toward his car. I screamed for help, but no one was around. Then I remembered the pepper spray in my purse. I reached for it and sprayed him in the face. He screamed and let go of me, rubbing his eyes. I ran to my car, jumped in, and locked the doors. I watched him through the window as he stumbled around, still screaming. Then I started the engine and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was miles away. I pulled over and called the police, telling them everything. They told me to come to the station and file a report. I haven't seen Ronnie since, but I know he's still out there somewhere looking for me. Fixing a broken dishwasher for a stranger seemed routine, until I realized the lemonade he offered might be more than just refreshment. Someone had broken the dishwasher on purpose. It looked like they had hit it with a wrench until the door fell off. This made me suspicious. I looked at the lemonade in my hand and decided not to drink it. Something was off, and I didn't trust Jonathan. Pretending to take a sip, I kept my lips shut. I asked Jonathan for a towel before I started working. While he went to get it, I poured the lemonade down the sink. When he returned with the towel, I acted like I had finished the drink. He smiled and told me to take my time. Then he left the room. Despite my fear, I wasn't entirely sure Jonathan had tried to poison me, so I focused on fixing the dishwasher. While I was working, Jonathan came back into the kitchen. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I was going to take a nap, but I heard you moving." "Oh, I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to wake you." "Don't worry about it," he replied. "I needed to get some groceries anyway. I'm headed out. If you finish early, feel free to use the kitchen and help yourself to any food you want." "Thanks," I said. Jonathan grabbed his keys and left. As soon as the front door closed, I felt relieved. I decided to skip lunch and get the job done quickly so I could leave. I started scrubbing out the filter when I heard the front door open again. Jonathan was back, and I felt nervous. He walked into the kitchen and stared at me. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Just finishing the job," I said. "Then I'll be out of your hair." "You didn't drink the lemonade, did you?" My heart raced. I knew I couldn't lie, but also couldn't tell the truth. "Actually, I didn't," I said. "It was delicious. Do you think you could make me another one?" Jonathan froze. He knew something was up. I saw a flicker of panic on his face. "Sure," he said. "I'll get right on that." He went to the fridge, grabbed a pitcher, and poured me another glass. He handed it to me. "There you go," he said. "Thank you," I said. "This looks even better than the last one." "Glad you think so," he said. I took a big sip, pretending to enjoy it. "Do you mind if I take a nap now?" he asked. "I think I left my watch in your bedroom," I said. "Would you mind if I go get it before you lay down?" He nodded and walked toward the door. I watched him go down the hallway. When he opened his door, I grabbed my phone and texted the police. Then I took another gulp of the lemonade and dropped my glass. The sound of shattering made Jonathan spin around. He saw me clutching my chest and gasping for air. "I think there was something in that drink," I said, collapsing on the floor. Jonathan ran toward me, panic on his face. "What happened?" he asked. "You poisoned me," I said. He got on his knees and checked my pulse, his eyes widening. He tried to talk to me, but I couldn't hear anything. The world was going black. The last thing I saw was Jonathan's terrified expression as the police stormed through the front door. What would you do if you found a hidden compartment in your new car, filled with chilling secrets that suggest the previous owner was a monster? Hey, I'm Martin, but some folks call me Hope. I'm 34 and a software developer living in Seattle. Recently, I've been going through a tough time. My girlfriend Jen and I broke up 6 months ago after being together for 5 years. It was messy, and I'm still not over it. I decided to move and get a fresh start, which included selling my car because it held too many memories of Jen and me. I found a decent deal on Craigslist for a 2015 Honda Civic. I had no idea that buying this car would turn my life into a nightmare. When I met the seller to check out the car, everything seemed normal. The seller, Bill, was a middle-aged guy who was very friendly. He said he was upgrading to a newer model. The car looked good, no major dents or scratches. I took it for a test drive, and everything seemed fine. We finalized the paperwork for $8,500, and I drove my new Civic back to my apartment. A few days later, I decided to clean the interior. That's when I made a disturbing discovery. Underneath the back seat cushions, I found a hidden compartment. It was a small door carved into the trunk area, leading to a tiny enclosed space between the rear seats and the trunk. I couldn't understand why a regular car would have something like this, unless it was for a sinister purpose. When I looked inside the cramped compartment, I felt sick. It smelled of stale sweat and something more sinister. Shining my phone's light inside, I saw streaks of dried brown liquid that looked like blood. Feeling nauseous, I quickly closed the compartment and stepped back, overwhelmed with dread. What terrible things had the previous owner, Bill, done with this vehicle? Had he used the secret room to transport victims he had harmed or killed? The questions swirled in my mind, each more horrifying than the last. I realized I was now connected to something deeply disturbing and possibly criminal. Part of me wanted to go straight to the authorities to report my finding and put as much distance as possible between me and whatever depravity this vehicle had witnessed. But another part of me, influenced by crime shows and horror movies, worried that coming forward might make me a person of interest, even a suspect. So I did nothing for the time being. I tried my best to go about my daily life and not think about the ominous secret compartment, but how could I not? Every time I opened the trunk or slid into the driver's seat, I was assaulted by phantom smells and visions of unimaginable horrors. The subtle stain of dread resurfaced, leaving me uneasy and tormented by morbid hypotheticals. Restless nights were punctuated by vivid nightmares, visions of being trapped in that cramped, sweaty compartment, banging hopelessly on the door, gulping stale air as my cries for help went unanswered. Other times I dreamt I was Bill, a mild-mannered monster calmly shuttling my unspeakable cargo to its grim destination. Awake, I began noticing small details about the vehicle that had previously escaped me. A splotch of reddish-brown discoloration in the trunk lining, strange symbols etched into the underside of the dashboard, and the faint acrid scent of chemicals lingering in the cabin's recirculated air. Each observation fed the cycle of dread and fueled my imagination to even darker places. After a week of inner torment, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. I would remove the wretched compartment, scrub the vehicle clean of any lingering remnants of its prior purpose, and be done with it once and for all. Armed with a toolkit and a bucket of industrial cleaner, I set about dismantling the hidden room. As I carefully pried away its flimsy wooden panels, I knew my plan was doomed to fail. Tucked amid the sickly beige upholstery was a small cardboard box. Its contents promised to further unravel what remained of my sanity. Inside, I found handwritten notes scrawled in what seemed to be chicken scratch. Pages and pages of rambling, half-coherent screeds vacillated between records of apparent daily minutiae and grandiose proclamations about bearing witness to an ethical truth. Certain chilling phrases leapt off the page, they're everywhere, hiding in plain sight. Horrible, unblinking eyes peering through the veil at all times. Can't let them steal my essence, not after coming this far. Another page, decorated with strange symbols reminiscent of those on the dashboard, read the time of transformation draws near. The offering prepares the vessel to shrug off its withered husk and be remade anew, incorruptible and eternal. As I read on, slack-jawed in disbelief, it became clear these were no ordinary unhinged ramblings. Something larger and far more insidious bound them together. As I sit here clutching those cryptic pages, part of me wants nothing more than to shove them back into the shadows and return to blissful ignorance. To move on from this existential detour and find some semblance of normalcy again, pushing bile-inducing questions of cosmic dread from my mind. But another part, call it sickening curiosity, or a deficit of self-preservation, feels inextricably drawn to unraveling this disturbing saga, even if the truth is too horrific to behold. For now, the mysterious compartment sits reopened in the car, almost daring me to keep pulling at its sickening threads. While part of me craves a return to blissful ignorance, another part can't resist the lure of the unknown.